Hello and welcome to Skill Acquisition Screencast. Today's focus is going to be on the types and uses of feedback. Now, this is a topic that's covered briefly in GCSE PE, but you don't have all of the feedback types that we have for A-level. So if we have a quick look through then, these are the feedback types you have to know. So we're looking at intrinsic, extrinsic, positive, negative, knowledge of performance, knowledge of results. Now, I think you will have memories of some of this. Okay, so you will have heard of intrinsic feedback. You'll have heard of extrinsic feedback. And I guess if you have a look at these types of feedback, what we have to do is we have to be able to kind of apply the range of assessment objectives to this. So we've got to be able to explain each one. We've got to be able to give an example for each one. And most important, as you can see down here, you've got to be able to give advantages and disadvantages of using each of these types of feedback. So in order, I mean, obviously there are a number of advantages and disadvantages of each feedback type, but really there is one specific previous piece of work that's massively important when evaluating the different types of feedback. And that is to do with the stage of learning. Okay, so different stages of learning would benefit from different types of feedback. So when you're evaluating some of these feedback types, often they will be linked to one of the stages of learning. So for example, intrinsic feedback. I'm pretty sure that a high number of you will be able to say intrinsic feedback is better for a certain stage of learning. Okay, so that that is something that you'll know from your kind of stages of learning work, and you can see how that might work. So that's kind of just making sure you understand when you're evaluating or giving advantages and disadvantages of different types of feedback, often the variable that allows you to start the evaluation will be linked to the stages of learning. So we'll have a look through that as we go along. Now today's screencast is going to have a look at positive and negative feedback. Okay, so if you make sure you make good notes on these, it's really important when you're making your call down notes on these that your questions are based around evaluation points as well as just a description. So make sure you're interrogating into those evaluation points, both positive and negative, to make sure you have a good understanding of them when you come into the lesson. First feedback type then, so you've got positive feedback. So positive feedback, very similar to something we've studied within operant conditioning, which is positive reinforcement. It's basically a positive stimulus or praise used when a response is correct. So I've put it onto here. So positive stimulus / praise when a correct response is given. Now, I'm not going to give examples on this screen, but I'm sure you can imagine. So, a basic example would be, well done for passing through the gate. Okay, now that to me is still relative, not the best positive feedback. And what we'll start to have a look at is what makes a positive feedback, this positive information, this praise following a correct response, what makes it effective? Okay, so the advantages of this type of feedback, what makes it effective? Well, the first thing is it's most effective if it is specific to the skill, part of the skill that's been successful. So I'm sure you can put that in there. So part of the skill. If you're telling someone well done for passing, it would be something like, well done for using the side of the foot, well done for keeping your head over the ball, well done for keeping 10 points of contact on a rugby ball. And I'm sure you can see what I mean by that, because that allows them to know why, which part of the stimulus response bond is being strengthened. Okay. I've just took me on to the next one. It's also extremely effective because it strengthens the stimulus response bond. And if the feedback is specific, it strengthens the stimulus response bond towards a desired response. And that is what coaching, teaching, learning is about. Trying to make sure people create SR bonds towards the correct response. And obviously, positive feedback is a great way to do that if it's specific. Now, if you start to think about the point I talked about earlier, stages of learning. Now we need to start considering kind of what stages of learning might positive feedback be best for. So it's really good for all learners, obviously, but it's particularly good for cognitive stage learners because it really gives them a sense of increase in confidence and motivation. So if you imagine when you're a beginner at something and you're not sure on something, you get it right, it really gives you a surge in your belief in yourself and also your drive to continue with it. So the confidence and motivation, particularly, like I said, in the cognitive stage of learning, it's really important you have that there as well. So they're the advantages then. So positive feedback, when is it not so good? Okay, what are the reasons behind it being ineffective? So if we start off then, first one, it's not great when it's not specific. Okay, so if somebody says, I don't know, you do an action and they just say, well done, that is not very specific because it doesn't tell you specifically what it is you've done well. So you don't really know that that is something you should continue to repeat and to create the stimulus response bond. The other key one is this: if somebody continuously says, well done, well done, well done, well done, okay, it can start to become a little bit kind of redundant. And if somebody overuses positive feedback over and over again, which is also not specific, of course, this can end up having a kind of a negative effect on the two things that could increase if positive feedback is done well. So it can decrease, and particularly I'll talk about, I'm not confident, but it decreases motivation, okay? And particularly for the autonomous stage of learning. You know, do they always need constant positive feedback? Well, it would say that if it's overused, it can also decrease its effect and therefore lead to a decrease in motivation. So make sure you've got a little link onto your stage of learning there, and that's your first feedback set done. Okay, so positive feedback. Now, positive feedback is paired with negative feedback. So what we're looking for here is a slight difference. So we've got negative feedback then is a negative stimulus, and I think a really good word to use when talking about feedback is criticism, because this word, negative stimulus, for example, criticism, following an incorrect response. Now, using that word criticism, I think all of us have heard of the word criticism, but I think all of us also will have an idea that criticism is fine as long as it's structured in a certain way, and usually a word will precede criticism to make it effective. So what is it that makes criticism effective? It's really good when it's constructive criticism, okay? And I'll put specific in there as well, because I think they work together. How to improve and what to improve. So it's really effective when it's constructive and specific on how to improve. So I've repeated that there. If we go on to the next bit, what else makes negative feedback really good? Well, I don't know about you. So depending on your personality type, depending on what works for you. Sometimes when somebody tells you something bad, initially it might get on your nerves. You might feel a bit down, but sometimes it can really act as quite possibly the most strong motivator you can have, because when somebody tells you can't do something, certain people will fight against it. You want to prove people wrong. So one of the key advantages of negative criticism, if it's structured constructively, sometimes it doesn't have to be, it can really lead to an increase in motivation. On top of that, this links to the stage of learning. It's particularly effective for autonomous performers. And the reason why is because autonomous performers are at the top level. They are looking for anything to kind of improve their performance. They want perfection. They want perfection. They want to be told what it is they're doing wrong, because they see failure as a stepping stone to success. Every little failure is something they can work on and get better and get better and get better. And let's be honest, that is everyone. That's what everyone should see. Failure is kind of a temporary thing which you're going to overcome and become better. So you can see how that works there then for negative feedback, and I'm sure you can start to see how this is going to work. So negative feedback then, if somebody gives you criticism following an incorrect response when you do something not so well, then that is really important that you kind of see, oh right, so what are the disadvantages to using negative feedback so we can avoid them. So first up then, if it's not specific and constructive, okay, that can really lead to what we've got here, the following bit, which is decreased motivation. So I'll put that there. So it could lead to a decreased motivation, obviously. And particularly the motivation can be decreased if it is overused with cognitive performers. Okay, that can be a real problem. So, if you're just a beginner and someone is going in there really quite strong by saying you are not very good, okay, or words to those effect, if people do that, then that, of course, can cause massive problems, because if it's overused with someone who's beginner, they will not carry on. Decreased motivation, which could lead to them not taking part in the sport. Okay, so I've tried to kind of use evaluation points that are relatively repetitive so that you can make sure you can apply it in the right way. So can I just ask you to make sure, looking here, you've got 3 evaluation points for each. The average kind of requested an exam question so far is about 2 advantages, 2 disadvantages per feedback. So it's really important you get questions that are interrogating each of these evaluation points. Okay, thanks very much.